Hello, I am Matt Gauger. I'm a developer, and apparently my coworkers think I'm a mad scientist, so they put the slide like that. I work at a place called Bendyworks in Madison, Wisconsin, and we basically founded Bendyworks, or I didn't found it, but the people who founded Bendyworks started on the ideas of Agile and software craftsmanship. So we talk about that a lot. We've been working on a lot. And one of the things we've experimented with over the past couple of years is this idea of apprenticeship. So apprenticeship is something that I'd like to see more regularly added to software craftsmanship. And so I'm going to talk about it today. So when we talk about software craftsmanship, we get some core values that are really in line with what we want to see in an apprenticeship too. We get these ideas of a willingness to learn, the ability to sort of try and fail, or willingness to try and fail, and taking a pragmatic approach to the processes that we use. Of the processes, or of all the things in our tool belts, I think apprenticeship should be applied when necessary, when appropriate, just like anything else. So we want to take a pragmatic approach to when we choose to use them. And the last thing that kind of the main point I want to make with this whole talk is that apprenticeship is a method by which we can help make a sustainable industry. And what do I mean by a sustainable industry? So in farming, we have this idea of permaculture. And in permaculture, the basic concept is that you can design farms that are sustainable, that they produce the food that people need, that they don't pollute, that they don't deplete natural resources, and that they feed back into themselves to produce next year's crops. So permaculture is the idea that by carefully choosing the practices that we implement, we can sustain our livelihoods. And I think that sounds like a pretty good idea for our industry too. So there's some big problems with our industry though, and how we hire and how we allow new people to enter the industry, or how new people enter the industry. First thing I see is that we have these HR departments set up to hire off of a resume, for a list of skills, for a list of experience that we would require. And I think that's unnecessary. I think instead what we should be doing is hiring for passion, for people who are full of potential, for people that are going to make great developers that we can train along the way. So the other problem is just getting into the field in the first place. A lot of us had a lot of opportunities that led us here. Some of us may have had an Apple II in our schools. Some of us had an early internet connection. Other of us were able to, spend our weekends learning Rails instead of taking care of our families or something like that. And so, because of those opportunities, we're here today, for better or worse. But not everyone has those opportunities. And what happens is, this is a problem of diversity. This is a problem of people entering the field. It's harder for less privileged people to enter this field, and this is something we need to solve somehow. So there's tons of research out there that say that more diverse teams are going to be more creative, they're going to solve problems better, they're going to make more profits than their competitors, but we rarely focus on diversity. So we need to look at diversity in our teams when we talk about software craftsmanship. And basically, my argument would be that software craftsmanship demands us to look for new perspectives, for new ideas. So why are we limiting ourselves to more people like us? The missing link in software craftsmanship is how we bring new developers into the fold, how we train them with what we know. And our teams have a ton of group knowledge. We've all built up tons of knowledge on our teams over time. But how do we actually train them in all that stuff that we know? How do they learn all of that group knowledge? So before we talk about things, there's a few terms I want to talk about. First one is culture. So when we talk about group knowledge, we should really be talking about your team's culture. And this is not just Emacs versus Vim or tabs versus spaces. we need to talk about what your beliefs are as a team, what your values are. And culture includes all the things that someone joining your team is going to have to learn. It also includes anything that your team believes in, that they've come to believe in through experience. This is something that someone entering your team is not going to know off the bat. So apprenticeship is a method by which you can transfer shared team knowledge to new people. Now, you could tell someone to read up on all of the practices that you consider, valuable to your team. And they may do that. They grab books or whatever, tutorials, but they may just cargo cult it, and they're not going to understand the why. So apprenticeship avoids this cargo cult problem by learning while doing. The next thing I'd like to talk about and sort of define the term apprenticeship itself. I feel like when I talk about it, a lot of people get the wrong idea in their head. The first idea that sort of comes up is that it's an internship, and it's not. We don't want apprentices going to fetch us coffee. We don't want them doing busy work. What we do want is for them doing real hands-on learning for the skills that we're going to use in our jobs. And the other idea or visual that comes into people's minds is that of a kid in a blacksmith shop, sort of covered in soot, working for a subsistence wage with the hope of a better life. I don't want this either for apprenticeship. The thing is, we want our apprentices to be happy and healthy, paid well, so that they're primed for learning and that they get to join our team as quick as possible. So instead, I'd like to define apprenticeship in terms of the Jedi. If you guys aren't familiar with the Jedi, I will try to explain a little bit here. They have these apprentices called Padawans, and they are apprentices. And the one sort of master-apprentice relationship we get to see in the movies, because the prequels don't exist, is Yoda and Luke. So Luke goes to the swamp and trains under Yoda, a Jedi master. And Yoda helps to sort of tame Luke's recklessness with Jedi meditation, with practice, and sets up a series of exercises for Luke to perform. Now Luke's goal, and Yoda's in this too, is to get Luke to being a Jedi Master himself, so that they can start solving the real big problems that Luke's team has, like defeating Lord Vader, saving the galaxy, that kind of thing. Important things for their team. And so a Padawan is going to learn all the skills and values necessary to be a master. And then they're going to go, once they've graduated through that process, and spread those ideas throughout the universe. I think this is kind of a cool idea. I don't know about you guys, but do you like the idea of us basically creating great master craftsmen and then sending them out to spread our ideas into the universe, make software development in the universe better? It's pretty cool. So when you're preparing for an apprenticeship program, there's a couple things you need to do to get ready. First thing, or the two things you should really do is have some team discussions, two in particular. The first one would be to have a discussion about your culture and your values, and sort of write down a list as you go of what your team thinks those are. But don't just stop there. Write down where those came from. Record why. That's really important. And then the next discussion would be a list of all the skills and practices that you feel are important for what you do. Now, I would caution you, because there's a tendency, we're developers, to focus on all the technical skills to list out. I want them to be experts in RSpec, and maybe they should learn some Jasmine, and suddenly they should also know Clojure, even though some of us on our team don't know the Clojure. Whatever. Don't do that. Instead, look at the practices that you use, BDD, TDD, and sort of pick those out, but also look at the cultural stuff. Look at the soft skills. So how you do project management, how you run meetings. These are important things that people on your team need to know. Focus on those instead, because what you can do is trust that with apprenticeship and with the sort of patterns or practices that I'm going to talk about, your team can learn those technical skills. The reason you can trust that this is true is because, I don't know about anyone else in this room, but by next year I'll probably be using a new test framework, probably be using a different language, different JavaScript framework, something. I'm going to learn something. So are all the apprentices coming through the program. That's not the hard part. The hard part is all the other knowledge. And so it's important not to discount these soft skills. There's a book from O'Reilly called Apprenticeship Patterns. We read this at BendyWorks as sort of a group book club before we worked on the most recent sort of iteration or version of our apprenticeship program. And while it's aimed at apprentices rather than people trying to start an apprenticeship program at their company, I think it's really valuable. I think you guys should check it out. So about a week ago, I was in my barber shop, and I said, I'm going to Buffalo, I'm giving this talk on apprenticeship. We started talking. It turns out my barber was the first apprentice at his barbershop. And it's kind of like, I was trying to explain it before, it's kind of like an old school barbershop, but they're pretty hip. There's lots of hipsters there. Anyways, so they care about their craft is the important part. And it turns out my barber was the first apprentice through their program. They'd never done it before. And what he told me was, you know, when I did this, when we got done with it, we realized they learned as much as I did. And so what you need to think about, or the takeaway from this, is that you're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to design a perfect program from the start. So be willing to look at, you know, what worked, what didn't, and improve it, and iterate, and keep going, and learn, basically. And that's how you make it better. So now that we're freed from hiring a resume, basically, what now? Well, we can hire in a number of ways. We want to look for these passionate people with lots of indicators that they're self-motivated learners, that they like pragmatic approaches to things, or that they approach problems in a way that we like. I don't think job ads work particularly well for this. I think instead you should be looking, you know, in your local meetups. You can talk to your local technical school instructors who are probably teaching like web design classes and stuff. Ask them if they have any sort of rising stars. But don't just be limited to local stuff either. Some of the other places you can look at GitHub issue queues for the open source projects you're on. People who are sort of just joining the field through that means. You know, Rails girls, all sorts of like hacker schools. Look for people who are on the way to becoming craftsmen, and you know, find them. The other thing that you can do is sort of tell your team, get the contact details of anyone that impresses you. Like if you have a conversation, this person really impresses you, bring them to me, basically. And this has worked out really well for BendyWorks. We found some really great people this way just because we were impressed by what they were doing. So when you do this, you can start hiring for people that complement your team, that fill gaps in your team, sort of create a wider range of skill sets and sort of personalities. And I think that's really powerful. So the other thing I'm going to say about hiring is consider hiring multiple people. The pattern I've seen that works well is hire 3 apprentices at a time, because one can work closely with a mentor and the other 2 can pair and teach each other and work on their own on a project. And with 4 people, you've got a small project there. So you could also consider more. I'd say don't be limited by just hiring 1 at a time. As far as the length for an apprenticeship, decide early and set that expectation from the start. These are people's time and lives that you're investing in, and so you're investing a ton of money into that, and you need to be realistic about that cost. They also need to know what's expected of them. At BendyWorks, we've traditionally done sort of like 3-month trial to hire sort of things. That turned out to work really well for apprenticeship, so we do 3-month apprenticeships. And then lastly, pay your apprentices fairly. They're not interns. Again, you want them to be sort of not stressing about money. You want them learning. So before we move on, we need to talk about failure, because you should be prepared for failure. But like other things in Agile, we can sort of look at our failures, figure out what didn't work, iterate, change it, adapt. Eventually, you're going to have an apprentice that can't complete the apprenticeship. This is just a fact of running apprenticeships. When that happens, they should know it was coming because of your feedback as a mentor. It should not be a surprise to them. And when it does, there's a couple things you can do just to make the situation the best you can. You can offer to introduce them to people in the industry. You probably know a lot more people in the industry than they do. You can allow them to mention the apprenticeship in their resume and online, and that'll help get them, on to the next part of their career. So at BendyWorks, we had an apprentice who couldn't complete the apprenticeship. It just became clear that they couldn't finish it, and we both knew, and they knew it was over. It was pretty mutual, but because part of our apprenticeship program has as a core idea improving the process itself, they sort of gave a presentation at the end of their apprenticeship that gave us feedback that later led to the checklist, which is a pattern I'm going to talk about in a second, basically ensuring the future success of other apprentices. So even in failure, we can find ways to succeed, and I think that's really powerful. I'm going to be sharing a number of patterns here, because I promised to in my talk description. These are the ones that we use at BendyWorks. You can sort of pick and choose, just like any other sort of patterns thing. In choosing patterns to implement, the things you want to look for are things that reflect and reinforce the skills that you're going to be using day to day, things that enforce sort of constant interaction with mentors rather than isolation, and the goal should be to get the apprentice through the apprenticeship as quickly as possible to, billing or shipping code or whatever. So these are some of the patterns I'm going to go over. The first one is mentorship. So the idea here being direct mentorship versus sort of group ownership of apprenticeship. The idea of, or the thing you can do is have a person on your team designated as sort of the person that's passionate about the apprenticeships that's going to act as mentor, and then all the apprentices come to them. A flip side of that is you could tell your apprentices coming in, get to know the team, and sort of find someone who really resonates with you and ask them to be your mentor. And with both of these, the thing that you need to keep in mind is that there's a ton of responsibility in that the mentor is responsible for the success of the apprentice. And there's things beyond just like support and programming. You want to be looking at sort of the person's happiness, the person's career goals, the person's mental health. And sort of the anti-pattern of this is that if everyone is responsible, no one is responsible, and we've seen that a number of times, so I think that's kind of important. Pairing. So at BendyWorks, we consider pairing to be one of our most important skills, one of our most important practices. It is the fastest way we found to share knowledge and get someone up to speed on a team. And so we pair all the time. You could have apprentices pair with a mentor, and this is really powerful, or they could follow around the mentor while they pair. This is a thing we call a trayer. I don't know if you guys do. Basically, to see how the mentor works on the project. Another thing you can do is that apprentices can go and pair with other apprentices, of course, but because they are apprentices, they have a lot more flexibility in what they do, so you can move them between projects a lot more quickly and get exposure to the entire team. So the anti-patterns for this one are isolating the new person and not learning the necessary skills. Another practice is personal retros. So this kind of comes from the idea of Agile Retros. We do personal retros on a weekly basis. Basically, the goals of these meetings are to look at what worked and what didn't, and try and make a change that's going to improve the situation for the next one. And then, on the next one, see whether that worked or not, that experiment. So everyone's invited to these. It's a chance for the group to give feedback on the apprentice's progress, and also the apprentice to sort of ask questions and talk about where they're at. This solves the anti-patterns of learning without direction and waiting too long. So this is the Agile Retrospectives book. It is very good. It does not talk about personal retros, but if you are interested in doing retros and sort of avoiding that, what did he call it, snitch and bitch situation that Jeff talked about this morning, I found that this was really successful for my own retros to sort of steer the team towards positive and positive change rather than negativity. So check out this book. Another thing we want apprentices involved in is real life cycle events for the project. So these are things like stand-ups with the client, story carding, iteration planning meetings if you do those, that kind of thing. There's more to consulting than just writing code, and So your apprentices need to understand that. They need to understand your process before they sort of get to you through the apprenticeship. And the anti-pattern here is that I thought my job was only to write code, which I've heard before. So now the checklist. This is huge for us. This is a private repo that we maintain on GitHub with a wiki. It is a set of achievable and learnable skills that apprentices are expected to learn. And what happens as far as the process is the apprentice forks the repo. They use it to track their own progress. They also can submit pull requests to improve it. And the thing that we've done with this, I alluded to it before, is that we focus on tech skills heavily in the beginning. We've since moved away from that. We're not so worried about the tech skills. Instead, we talk about practices. We talk about philosophy. And so the idea of demonstratable in this checklist is that you pair with a mentor or just talk to a mentor and explain the philosophy, explain the reason why, and sort of demonstrate that knowledge. And this solves the anti-pattern of an overwhelming amount to learn. So the final project is basically a small, safe client project, not necessarily with a real client. You can have a simulated client. Ideally, the client, whoever it is someone who's well-versed in your process and you know can work well with your process. So be careful about who you pick for that client role. The goal for these should be challenging but achievable. So don't pick something that they're not going to be able to complete, especially if it's scoped to like 2 weeks or something like that. But do pick something that's going to be challenging because you want them to sort of feel like they did a significant project, they shipped. So often we look for business value in these. We look for pro bono work that we wanted to do, or friends with businesses where they might have a small project that we could have an apprentice work on, and then we sort of set that up. Just don't forget to scope these projects aggressively. That's my main takeaway from these. And this solves the anti-pattern of never having shipped a project. So at BendyWorks, we consider speaking and writing, being involved in the community as much as we are, really core skills, and we want that in our apprenticeship as well. The idea here is not to discourage people who are terrified of speaking publicly, but set up safe environments where they can do so. So this might be our internal brown bag talks. This could be local meetups. Could be writing for the BendyWorks blog or their personal blog, that kind of thing. But what this does is it helps validate their new expertise and share it back to the community, as well as introduce them to the community. So this solves the anti-patterns of being unknown in the community, basically. And the last thing, the last pattern I like to talk about is improving the process. So we consider it very important that the system feeds back into itself, that you're going to learn throughout the process, and the apprentices are going to learn, and they're going to have the best feedback for how that should change so that the next set of apprentices is more successful. What you want to do is probably run overall retrospectives on each apprenticeship, as well as frequently review your materials and your sort of ideas about what you're using for apprenticeship, and try and improve them. And again, a lot of this can come from the apprentices involved in the apprenticeship itself. So once you're there, consider doing apprenticeships for other things. We're considering doing apprenticeships for design and establishing what that would mean for a design apprenticeship. But also, you can look at other parts of your business. You could look at just the business side of things, accounting and that. And there are other factors in play there, like professional certifications, but you can still look into those. And so what you can do is start making a sustainable business. And that's how we make the industry sustainable and spread our values through the universe like the Jedi. So, thank you. I'm Matt Gauger.